Today, for a very special episode, we are venturing beyond Australian shores to Raleigh, North Carolina, United States, where we'll raise a glass at the beautifully restored Heights House Hotel, a historic Italian-style mansion blending boutique luxury with warm hospitality. Joining us is Kate Moran, VP of Research and Content at Nielsen Norman Group, the gold standard in UX research. A globally recognized expert, Kate's insights into user behavior and AI are shaping the future of digital experiences for thousands worldwide.
People are afraid of small samples. Sometimes that can happen because they may have an attachment how great the product is. And if they start hearing something to the contrary, psychologically it's easier to discount that evidence to just say, oh, well, maybe it's just a few people who, aren't representative. Imagine you're standing on the side of the road and there's a big pothole in the middle of the road and you see cars driving down the street and they keep hitting that pothole. You don't have to stand there and count 350 cars hitting that pothole before you say, hey, maybe somebody should fix that. If you are running qualitative research and you want to be very confident in it, it is important to make sure that the right people are being included in that study. If my product doesn't exist yet, I might recruit people who already use similar competitor products. And this is really important because at the heart of everything we're studying here is really human psychology and human behavior. So that can vary from individual to individual, from group to group. And so in order to have a good understanding of your particular user group and their needs and their expectations and the way they think and what they value, you've got to be asking the right people.
Let's unpack that a bit more. Why do you feel that it's going to be a bad thing?
Oh, how much time do you have? This is a huge topic because there are lots of ways in which AI is changing our roles as people who conduct research or people who call themselves researchers or people just who work in product. One of the ways is it's advising people on how to do things that they're not familiar with. You can kind of use it as a starting point to explore a space. That's certainly also true with research. So if I'm a product designer, I might want to turn to something like ChatGPT, Claude, for advice on how to get started with research. The key is, we all know this philosophically, there are hallucinations, there are problems with the underlying training data, and that comes out in bad advice.
All right.
Nice.
Welcome to Season 2 of Cask and Convos and our new home, the Urban Alley Brewery, right at the heart of Melbourne, District Docklands. Born from a love of great beer and a mission to bring world-class brews to Melbourne's doorstep, Urban Alley has been crafting award-winning beers that bridge the gap between mainstream and craft, blending tradition with innovation. With a state-of-the-art 25-hectoliter brew house and a 690-person brew pub, this is where bold flavors and even bolder conversations come to life. But great ideas don't just happen over a pint. They need the right space to grow. That's why we are teaming up with Natural Velocity, a co-working hub built for innovators and game changers. Because whether it's in business or at the bar, the best ideas happen when the right people come together. So pull up a chair and let's dive in. Hello, Kate.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us over here. And thank you for the recommendation for Heights House Hotel.
Sure.
For our viewers, we are right now in Raleigh, in the beautiful state of North Carolina, United States. And we are interviewing Kate Moran from NNG. Kate, it's been amazing to get to know you and see your mind work and the way it unpacks things. And today I would love to know more about the way you guys do research and the future of research. So tell us a bit. A lot of our viewers are actually wondering about differences in research because often in the industry, people don't understand the nuances between qualitative and quantitative research, which can lead to a lot of misguided assumptions. So tell us a bit more about that. What do you think?
So a couple of key ways to remember the differences between qualitative and quantitative research, especially as it relates to experience design. One of the easiest is to just pay attention to the letters of the word. So quantitative, quantity has to do with numbers. Usually in experience design research, we're looking to see, what percentage of users interact with a specific feature. We might get that from analytics data. Or we might conduct a survey and we're trying to gauge interest in, potentially something new that we're going to offer our users, or we want a better understanding of their demographics. So that would, again, be quantitative research. Qualitative, on the other hand, qualitative quality. We're looking at sort of more of the nuance, more of the characteristics, not really gathering numerical data so much. Instead, we're trying to find insights and stories, anecdotes, and that can happen on an individual level. So for example, if I run a user interview and I have a conversation with somebody who is, using a product that I work on, I might be asking them questions about their experiences. Or let's say I'm studying an AI product and I want to understand how my customer thinks about AI or how they understand it. I might kind of probe with some questions to get to the heart of that with a series of individuals. So sometimes with qualitative research, we're doing that, smaller scale. Especially when it comes to UX design, we really value that type of research because it helps us not only understand what people are doing, but also the reason behind those actions. Mm-hmm. So at Nielsen Norman Group, sometimes we'll have clients, for example, that come to us and say, we've got a really high churn rate in this app. So we have this numerical data. We have no idea why. We don't understand why people are leaving after they get set up in our app. So in that kind of circumstance, sometimes we might look for other quantitative data points. Maybe there's a specific screen in an app where people are getting stuck. And that might give you a hint as to what's going on behind those numbers. But really the most reliable way to deeply understand how your human beings that are using your products or services are thinking about it and experiencing them is to watch them actually do that or to ask them questions about it. Mm-hmm. So kind of in a nutshell, that's the key difference.
And that's really beautifully put, because I think that is one thing which is always a question in everybody's mind. And one of the key blockers that a lot of products face is they ship out a product in the market because the initial market research has given them great feedback. Mm-hmm. They've done focus groups where everybody said, hell yeah, I would love to have this. Mm-hmm. Excuse my language. But then something goes wrong
and they can't just
they can't just pinpoint it. Yep. And so let me ask you one more question, because and I have encountered this quite often in my career, is qualitative research doesn't need the kind of numbers that quantitative data needs. And that is one thing which I think a lot of organizations don't understand. The moment we say qualitative research, immediately, yes, the red flags,
people are afraid of small samples.
Yes.
Sometimes that can happen because they, may have an attachment, an idea of how great the product is. And if they start hearing something to the contrary, psychologically, it's easier to discount that evidence to just say, oh, well, maybe it's just a few people who, aren't representative. We don't believe that. We really believe at Nielsen Norman Group that you need both quantitative and qualitative data, but also that qualitative can be really valuable even with small sample sizes. My favorite way to explain this to stakeholders that are a little skeptical is, it depends on the type of research you're doing. Mm-hmm. And so let's set aside like discovery exploratory research, which might inform, I'm creating a new product or a new feature. So I just want to understand my users and I want to understand the problem space. Set that aside. Let's think about looking at problems that exist within existing experience. It's what we typically call evaluative research. You're evaluating something. So with evaluative research, we're often looking to identify problems or opportunities to improve whatever we're building and designing. And what I like to use as a metaphor is, imagine that you are standing on the side of a road, and other people have similar metaphors. I'm not the only one who uses this, but imagine you're standing on the side of the road and there's a big pothole in the middle of the road. So there's a big hole in the pavement. And you see cars driving down the street and they keep hitting that pothole. You don't have to stand there and count 350 cars hitting that pothole before you say, hey, maybe somebody should fix that. So that's kind of the idea.
Yes.
Now, that said, if you are running qualitative research and you want to be very confident in it, it is important to make sure that the right people are being included in that study. Mm-hmm. So these should be people who either are currently using your product actively or potentially could. So let's say, I'm working on a competitor app for DoorDash or Deliveroo, like one of these food delivery services. If my product doesn't exist yet, I might recruit people who already use similar competitor products. And this is really important because at the heart of everything we're studying here is really human psychology and human behavior. So that can vary from individual to individual, from group to group. And so in order to have a good understanding of your particular user group and their needs and their expectations and the way they think and what they value, you've got to be asking the right people.
Yes. And I think that's where the conversation around bias always crops up, because if you don't have the right user group, bias will come in, which will massively take you in an absolutely wrong direction.
Well, there's always going to be bias in any study, and it's important that as researchers or people who do research, we acknowledge that. Yes. and are constantly aware of it and thinking about how we can minimize it.
I'm actually reminded of a very basic example which happened in a previous workplace, where they were moving from cabin style working or cubicle working to open desk, and they did a survey, and that takes me to how people report on research as well. So they did a survey, the HR team did, because or rather maybe it was a property team. Either ways, they had to report how receptive are people to the idea of hot desking. Not just open desking, but hot desking. So you don't have a dedicated desk, and you have to move around, and it's literally a first come, first serve. So the survey said 40% of people were open to the idea. So how they reported it is 40% of people are very keen on hot desking.
Oh, no.
And I looked at that report and I was like, what about the other 60%?
Also, there's a big difference between would be open to thinking about it versus very keen.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's a lot of power in research, and this is where it's an ethical question, but it's also self-reflection is really important, because we have to remember that we are, as researchers, still human beings.
Yes.
So we still do have all our own biases, and so we need to be checking those constantly and making sure we're not manipulating the data or misrepresenting it in any way.
And what's a good way to do that?
Well, there are several ways. So first is making sure that if you are somebody who's going to be running research, or even if you're just someone who's going to be looking at research findings from, say, someone else on your team or a contractor or consultant or something like that, just be aware of the general biases. So basic things like sample bias. I really think everyone should be at least minimally informed on basic research design concepts, because that allows you to think critically when you see other results from other studies being presented to you, and then you can ask the right questions. So that's valuable whether or not you're going to be the one running the research.
And what about teams that don't have researchers? Because that is one of the critical thing which has emerged, especially after the pandemic, especially with the economic downturn globally. I've seen a constant trend of researchers being let go before anybody else in the design team, which is a very sad reality. Yes. And that is because, and I actually interviewed a lot of recruiters, a lot of product managers, and even design teams and heads of design team. And the general consensus was that there is a sentiment that product designers can carry out research. So we don't want to pay for a completely separate skill set when our product designer can be a, what do you call it? A
unicorn.
Unicorn.
Poor product designers. That's a lot to put on them.
Exactly. And product designers don't want to do that because they want to focus on their craft.
And it's probably not, something that brought them into the field. Yeah, it's funny, I started smiling while you were talking because I remember a few years back when research democratization was a really hot topic. A lot of researchers were really concerned about it. So this idea that we're trying to make research accessible to everyone, not just gate kept by researchers in an organization, that's how it was pitched, getting everyone involved. And there were a handful of thought leaders in the experience research space that were like, is this going to lead to us being fired and they're just going to put our work on product designers? And it turns out, unfortunately, many companies are doing that. In many cases, that stems from a lack of understanding still of the value of research, why it is a business advantage, why it actually, it seems like a cost center, but it ends up saving you a lot of time and money in the long run because you don't build the wrong things. And I think AI enabling people to collect that data, to run research more easily, even with less expertise, is going to accelerate that trend. And I think in some cases that's going to be a good thing. And in a lot of cases it's going to be a bad thing.
Let's unpack that a bit more. Why do you feel that it's going to be a bad thing?
Oh, how much time do you have? So a couple of concerns, and this is a huge topic because there are lots of ways in which AI is changing our roles as people who conduct research, or people who call themselves researchers, or people just who work in product. One of the ways is it's advising people on how to do things that they're not familiar with. So, many of us, myself included, might turn to ChatGPT and ask it questions about a new area that we're exploring. For example, my husband and I are getting into aquariums. We just got our first fish tank. Very nerdy. I wasn't nerdy enough, so I had to get more nerdy. There's a lot of terminology and jargon, and in an unknown information space, it's very difficult to know where to begin. So AI is very welcoming because you don't have to know the terminology. You don't have to know all of the questions or the keywords that you want to use. You can kind of use it as a starting point to explore a space. That's certainly also true with research. So if I'm a product designer, I might want to turn to something like ChatGPT, Claude, for advice on how to get started with research. So there's this piece of it where it's advising people. The key is, we all know this philosophically. There are hallucinations. There are problems with the underlying training data, and that comes out in bad advice. That is specific, that's true with the aquarium example. Like I ended up, it was a good starting point. I ended up finding out some of the things it recommended were actually not a good idea. It had recommended plants that, were going to work well with the fish that I'm planning to stock the aquarium with. Turns out those are actually not compatible. So little things like that. But because I did my homework and I double-checked, I fact-checked, I was able to find that. I have some anxiety about non-research roles asking AI to be basically a research coach for them. I think in many cases it'll provide good information. The problem is it's so nuanced, it's so contextual, and this is where these systems, these LLMs, they keep getting smarter, they keep getting better, they still struggle with that level of nuance.
Yes. I would love to explore that part of a bit more, but before that, I have a very controversial question to ask.
Okay.
IDEO came up with this whole, they started on design thinking, and suddenly, as you mentioned, design was getting democratized overall across the world. And do you feel the fact that now design thinking is such a widely understood subject, not in depth, but at least in the surface, is kind of driving this behavior where people feel that just because as a team we can do design thinking, we can workshop together and we can collaborate and come up with ideas, do you think it's contributing to undermining the importance of research?
I think that could be a factor. However, this issue sort of predates design thinking in some ways, or at least its widespread popularity. I don't see a problem with I don't see design thinking and research as being incompatible. I think the research seems less fun to people. I think the design thinking seems fun. We have the Post-its, you know, we're brainstorming, we're ideating, like blue sky thinking, like that is fun to most people. Research seems scary, I think, to a lot of people. I'm the opposite. I love the research. It's very fun to me. But it involves wanting to talk to people, and not everybody has that drive, or that you have to be very patient. You have to be willing to listen to people even when you don't think it's going to be relevant to your research question. Because I've had so many interviews and research sessions and field studies and usability test sessions where I was like, I'm not really getting what I need, but I'll just wait this out. And then the next moment, my participant says something amazing or does something so interesting. So anyway, it's not for everyone. It has a lot of jargon in it. Yes. It seems expensive and time consuming and intimidating. So we started off talking about like how AI is going to change research, and I said there's going to be some good and some bad things. That's one area where I see a benefit, that like if AI can make research less scary and less intimidating and more approachable to people, that's great. There will be some bad advice it's going to give. So I really do recommend, if the risk is high, if you're planning a study and you really have to knock it out of the park, and you're going to make, resource decisions, you're going to allocate resources based on the results of this study, the risk is pretty high. Don't just use AI to advise you on how to do the research and stop there. Look at the sources. Make sure that you're double checking the advice with a reputable source.
That's a very important advice, I think. And one of the things which a lot of organizations, or rather a lot of product owners, get confused on is when to do the research, or even given, say, my tight timelines.
Yeah, it's hard.
I don't want to get into a research activity because that will take time. And then what if I have to flip after that?
Yes.
So, and I personally feel it might be an organizational problem where that room to pivot is not there. It's not being baked in. What do you feel?
Certainly that's the case. So we tend to see that in an organization where the research is happening later in the process of like releasing a new feature or product, there's only so much you can do at that point. If I've been in this situation, and I know many people who have, being a researcher in an organization, and somebody comes to you and says like, oh, can you test this thing right before we launch it live? Yeah. And you test it and you realize like, hey guys, people don't want this. They don't want this at all.
Nobody wants to hear that.
No one wants to hear that when they've already invested the time. So a big piece of it is getting the research and the UX involvement earlier on in the process, but that does require a mature approach to experience design that not every organization has. But this again is another place where AI could be really helpful. Accelerating research could be amazing. Now, my opinion is that needs to be grounded in an understanding of the current limitations of these systems, and we need to be delegating to AI systems and AI agents much more focused, specific tasks. I don't see a problem, though, as long as there's a lot of human involvement and oversight with, for example, delegating your research participant recruitment to AI. There's no reason why I can't tell, a system, hey, look, I'm looking for these characteristics, and I'm, these are my parameters. Make sure you include these types of people. Don't let anybody in if they, work in our industry and they're going to know too much about design, for example. And make sure I have a balanced sample with like different demographic backgrounds. Like there's no reason I shouldn't be able to tell AI to go handle that for me and have it put together a proposal. I've combed through this research panel platforms database, and I found these 8 people that match your criteria. Should I invite them? Yep, go ahead and invite them. There's just like all of these little sort of tedious things, time-consuming things that AI really could speed up for us. And in an ideal world, that would mean we're doing more research. You said people are confused about when to do it. All the time is the best, but we don't always have that option. So it'd be great if AI could enable us to run research really easily, really cheaply. My fear is that people are going to skip over all that. and just be like, well, why can't I ask AI if my product is good?
Yes, and that brings us to a very interesting topic, which is synthetic users. I think that is one thing which a lot of people have started to kind of, what do you call it, lean towards? Because
It's an attractive
it's
idea.
cheap and easy,
Yeah.
and very attractive. Let's explore that a bit. What are your views on that?
Oh, I have a lot of views. Oh, sure, buddy. I have so many opinions. So yeah, let's talk about synthetic users. So there are different, when you talk about a synthetic user, there are different approaches to this. There is a company called Synthetic Users. Usually when people are talking about a synthetic user today, what they mean is basically an AI pretending to be your customer. So I am going to be working on a product, let's say, that's for photographers. Well, I can ask this AI chatbot to pretend that it's a photographer who's in this demographic category, who uses photo editing apps like Photoshop, so it has a frame of reference. So I can basically be like, you pretend like you're my customer. There's value in that, in being able to talk to a bot that's representing that group. There's a lot of risk also with that approach. So we can talk about the different sort of levels of risk that I see, but one of the major ones is people might just stop there. So that might make people feel like they're doing research, when in reality they're just talking to an AI chatbot. And my personal feeling is, unless that AI chatbot is going to be purchasing your product, you should probably talk to the real humans that are doing it.
Let's explore the repercussions of that.
Sure. Well, so and just one more thing. So we're talking about here, like if you asked ChatGPT to pretend to be your customer, or if you used one of these platforms like syntheticusers.com, I believe is their URL. They have some additional layers of prompt engineering, and I believe also they've fed their system on some slightly different data. So you're going to get slightly different results. But basically what these tools have in common is it's like putting an AI face on a set of data. So like putting a face on the entire internet, asking the AI to create a filter to like all of the information that's publicly available and in its training data set about these specific photographers that I'm targeting, let's say like landscape photographers to make it more specific. So that information is from the internet, which means that if I have access to it, so do my competitors. So first problem, I'm not going to find, if I'm looking for like that innovative idea that's going to give me the edge over the competitors because I understand my customer better than they do, that's probably not going to come from AI.
That's a really good point. I think that is one thing which a lot of industries don't understand is AI gives bias.
Yes.
And the way to think out of the box.
Can we just pause on that and say it again for the people in the back? That there is bias in AI because I have heard people say, oh, it's going to be great when AI can do your research for you or your analysis for you or whatever, because it doesn't have bias. I'm like, what? Of course it does, because its data has bias. Its training data always has bias. And then even the way we interact with it creates further bias.
Exactly. And I think that is the nuance where you need, if somebody's selling your research tool saying that it can do, AI can tell you all the analysis of it, and we can, tell you exactly where these points are. That's a bit dangerous versus somebody telling you AI will highlight the areas.
Yes. And then you use your human intelligence.
Exactly.
Yes.
So I think that's the difference between a great tool versus a dangerous tool.
And it's a scoping problem, right? It's trying to hand the AI more responsibility than it's really ready for.
Yes.
So there's this problem of like the current version that I see largely when people talk about synthetic users. This is what they're talking about. So there's the problem of everybody else has access to that data, so it's not going to be necessarily unique. The other problem with that approach is there are going to be certain things that are documented on the internet and then also in scientific literature, and there are going to be other things that aren't. So, for example, if I am, like, let's say I'm for some reason working for a gas station, have you ever written a review online about a gas station? Like, have you ever taken the time to go post a review? No. Because if you have a good experience, you're just going to move on. So it's one of those things where, like, if that's, let's say, hypothetically, that's what I'm researching, there's not going to be a lot of publicly available customer review data probably for that specific thing. So this can happen that, like, if you are studying more niche populations, or if you're studying some, like, a context like this where, like, people don't tend to really think very much about how they interact with gas station pumps. They don't usually post about it online. So there's less of an online presence. That's going to make the data more unreliable. And then on the top of that, we have the problem again that all AI systems do, which is there's going to be some amount of hallucinations. And there are things that we're doing to reduce those hallucinations, the rate at which we encounter them, but they are still there, and it's a big problem for research. Because imagine if you get, like, a false piece of information from the system, you don't do any real research with your actual customers, you start making huge business decisions based on that faulty information. That's a huge waste of time. I've seen it tank companies.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
And this is something which you raised really interestingly around the data that is underlying all of this research. Or rather, sorry, the data which the AI is passing. And a very common trend is when people have a bad experience, that's when they will leave reviews about something. Generally, when people have a good experience, they don't. So that's also one missed opportunity where you don't really know what's great about your product or what really works well. And you're always on that, problem solving mode.
Yes.
And you might actually remove some of the things which were working really well in your product, which were bringing people to your product.
Because you don't realize that those were strengths.
Yeah.
That's totally true. So that's one potential issue. My colleague, Maria Rosala, who's director of research at Nielsen Norman Group, and I we wrote an article about this a few months ago. And we compared the kinds of behaviors that we had a real data set that we actually collected with real users. And then we compared that to what various synthetic users, platforms returned on the same people or the same profile. And the differences were really funny because, so for example, like the data set we were looking at was how people approach self-paced education. So like platforms like Udemy, for example, how they approach it. AI was a lot more likely to say, as the user, like pretending to be the user, yes, I always complete every course fully. I watch all the modules, like it's overly positive. I do all the activities. That's the opposite, of what we find in real life. People are messy. They forget about things. They like lose motivation. So
they save 100 courses.
Yes.
Thinking that they'll get
someday I'll get to
do
this.
it.
Yes. So you're missing that messiness and that nuance because AI has this tendency to want things to be like more clean and positive, I guess. So those are all the potential issues with it. Let's talk about when synthetic users could be positive, could be a good thing. What I've heard from some co-founders, CEOs, people who are running small research platform startups, is some of them are running at creating synthetic users based on your research repository. That I am more interested in. Yeah. So instead of putting a face on the internet and having ChatGPT pretend to represent my users based on publicly available data, I would be more interested in, especially if I'm a large organization doing a lot of research and have collected a big body of information about my customers, allowing my stakeholders to interact with that, basically a persona that can talk to you, essentially. Now, it's still going to be risks, right? Still going to be risks of hallucination, still going to be risks, you can imagine a stakeholder being like, tell me that I should build this thing that I already want to build anyway. And maybe it'll respond and say, yes, you should, and here's why. Because there's this problem of sycophancy. Yes. These AI systems want to make us happy. Yeah. So anyway, so I think there's a way that we could use this as long as it's something that is delivering real research findings in a new way versus artificial research findings.
Yeah, and I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but tell me one thing. I was thinking that maybe synthetic users might be a good sounding board to prep, but not actually use it for actual research data.
Absolutely.
But same do thing. A prep.
Yeah, same thing as, researching my aquarium stuff. Like
Yeah.
that's a good starting place so that I
Yes.
know what else I want to go explore and double check on. Same thing with synthetic users. So one of the things that Maria and I talked about in our article was, Maria pointed out that she had a client project where it was a very technical role that she was going to be studying, and she had no idea what this job was like super, super technical, very, very niche. She had never met anybody who did this job. She didn't know any of the jargon. So before she did a series of interviews with the real people, she used one of these synthetic users platforms. And so she was able to ask the kind of, stupid questions, being like, is this the right way to talk about this? Kind of bouncing ideas off. And that's a great use of it.
Yeah, I think that would actually make your research also very cost efficient, because you're not wasting
Yes.
time, you are better prepared going into research and just asking better questions.
Yep.
Yeah,
Exactly.
great. Tell us a bit more, like what does the future of research look like according to you? How do we evolve as researchers?
Well, and I think this is it's not just for research. I kind of consider this tied into the larger UX experience design landscape. I think we've got to be really flexible. We've got to let go of the way that we've done things in the past. We can't cling too tightly to that because our roles are changing rapidly, and that's going to accelerate. That's due to AI, and also due to the fact that, especially those of us employed by companies in the United States, with the interest rate situation, some of the macroeconomic factors over the past couple of years, we have seen a lot more competition for UX jobs. That's also because we have a lot of new people entering the field, and because we have a little bit of kind of competition with product, I would say. So we have to be better at talking to the business. We have to be better at dealing with stakeholders. We have to be better at communicating. And for research in particular, I think that means really trying to find the balance between rigor, like insisting this is the right way to do it, we have to do it this way, versus practicality. Because we are an applied science, we do need to serve business needs or we will not be employed. And that is the reality of working in a business.
Absolutely. And that's one of the hardest parts for any researcher for that matter. And I think that that prompts that we need to equip our researchers with a bit more of business education and just that business acumen. I mean, obviously, they don't need to be financial experts or product experts or anything like that. But being able to, business is also your user. So how do you build empathy for your business? How do you build empathy for your stakeholders and not feel that they are against me, but rather, okay, they're also in a way my users. So how do I really empathize with them and try to talk in their language?
Yes. And we've not always been great at that, especially in the research side of things. So I think that's a big goal that I have, and that's actually something that I think AI can help with. I've done this personally, and I know a lot of other people that have used general purpose chatbots like ChatGPT and said, hey, be a stakeholder. I'm going to pitch for this funding that I want, this budget that I want for this project. So you're going to be a skeptical stakeholder and you're going to ask me critical questions and help me prepare. That's a great use of AI to help you sort of practice in the same way that you might practice with a synthetic user before you go talk to a real user. So we have to be flexible. We have to be creative with how we're integrating AI into our work and using it to accelerate our work. So of course, there's the obvious things like, automating some tedious work and helping you write emails and documentation. Eventually, I think pretty soon we're going to see more of these like AI agents that can go, collect all of my participants for me. We're, I think this year, going to see more attempts at having AI systems that can evaluate interfaces. I'm very skeptical of that. The ones that I've seen so far, for example, Gemini 2.0, they just, I think, made this feature publicly available where you can kind of look at a single screen. You can share a window with Gemini and speak to it about what you're looking at. So I've seen people trying to test this out, showing it their website and saying, critique this website for me, ask me questions about my design decisions. That's cool. It's cool that it can kind of see what you're doing in real time and talk to you about it. that is the technical capability that's going to be required if AI is ever going to be able to run behavioral research like usability testing. But every example I've seen, and then also when I tested it out myself, very shallow, like, very, very shallow, like no deep insights, nothing specific to your user group. So it'll be interesting to see how that evolves. But I think our research methods are going to change dramatically in the way that we do them, the speed that we can do them at, and hopefully also, that's going to accelerate our impact. I think on the negative side, or the more pessimist side, I am concerned that AI doesn't have to be as good as we are. It has to be good enough to convince leadership that they can get away with AI and not pay for staff, unfortunately.
That is true. That is a harsh reality that we all have to deal with. And I think that is where pragmatic leadership needs to step in and understand that you can't get a bot govern you. Because if you're allowing a bot to govern you, it'll very soon replace you.
Yes.
So even as a leader of an organization, if you're letting AI do all the job without really valuing the human workforce and the kind of enriched insights it can get, and generally the enrichment in overall work practices that we can get,
I know. Yeah.
I think you are setting yourself up for failure.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I think also, I am disappointed that this is what's happening, that they're like, oh, we have AI tools, we can do more with less. Well, let's do the same amount with fewer people versus let's do more. Let's keep the same number of people we have and have a bigger impact and like move faster and impact more and create more and like innovate. And there's so much bad design in the world. It makes me sad to see that we're not using this for that purpose. Maybe that'll change. Again, I think some of that kind of ties into the macroeconomic conditions where there are a lot of leaders right now, and I understand, are under a lot of pressure to cut costs. And so it's unfortunate that some of those organizations still perceive research and design work as being nice to have, when we obviously think that it's the core of that competitive advantage.
Yes. And I think that is where we have to be very pragmatic about the ROI that AI implementations are bringing to you, and whether it's even sustainable in the long run or not. Especially when you're looking at replacing your workforce, who are you replacing and why are you replacing them? Or can you look at better ways of augmenting them? I remember this organization, and I'm not going to take any names, but they actually did a pretty interesting job when machine learning came into place, and it was, and they were a financial organization. They had to advise their users on financial outcomes. They had a lot of, they realized that they could really augment their capabilities in terms of looking at reading financial data and looking at certain patterns and things.
Which makes sense.
That.
AI would be great at that. Good at looking at data, good at patterns.
Exactly. What they did, so they could actually, so what would take a financial planner probably 8 days to go through an entire financial portfolio and put it together, started to take literally 45 minutes. Yep. But they looked at it as an opportunity to not let go of their financial planners, but rather they could get more business in as a result. And the same financial planner
could have 8 times as many clients.
Could manage a lot more portfolios, could advise their clients better because that initial vetting was being done, and they could, and the human element was still there.
That's more time they can spend talking to their clients and advising them. Yeah. That's a great example, and I wish that more organizations would take that perspective. I think maybe they will, because we're starting to see a lot of AI fails. We're seeing, certainly that's the case in product and feature design. We're seeing a lot of organizations that were like, quick, we need to cram AI into this thing. It didn't go well. They have, especially some of the social media platforms, they're just where all of these big announcements at the end of 2023, look, we're putting AI into the product. And then it flopped, and they quietly remove them a few months later because it doesn't work and it's expensive.
Yeah, and to be honest, I'm not going to name the platform, but a social media platform that looks at personal messaging incorporated this AI chatbot. And prior to that, it was a really good platform because I could, and funny thing is, I could actually retrieve some certain messages which talked about, say, a certain recipe or a certain bit of information, like simple thing. I have to go to a friend's house. I've forgotten her address. I remember that she lived in that suburb. I would just type that suburb in that chatbot search field, and it would just show me the chat. So I would immediately know what her address was. Simple things like that. The moment they introduced the AI chatbot, they made the search mandatory through the AI chatbot. What happened is, now AI chatbot, when you started it did not consider any of the data which was discussed before, obviously because of privacy issues and things like that. So
they broke a useful basic feature to add a new fancy feature that gave you no value.
It gave me no value, and it is so frustrating now to look for any information, because now if I look for a suburb or a recipe, it looks up stuff on the web and gives me.
Or it'll try to generate an image for you. You're like, great, that's what I wanted. I wanted bad AI art of this suburb.
Exactly. And I'm like, that's not what I was looking for. No. I was looking for stuff in my personal chat, and you've just lost it.
You know what? It's just going to be, this is how it always is anytime there's new technology. And this is such big technology, like so much variety in terms of how we can apply it. We're just kind of like collectively feeling out, like, is this the way to do it? Oh, no, definitely not that way. We need to be thinking about, like, again, go back to our basic principles of, is it going to bring value to the user? Is it going to be maintainable long term? Does it impact any other features in a negative way? Like thinking more about this holistic experience versus just putting AI in for AI's sake.
Yeah, exactly. And on that note, any final thoughts?
I mean, I could go on for another 3 hours, but we should probably go get lunch.
Yes, we should. All right. Thank you so much for joining us over here. And thank you for introducing us to this beautiful space. Just for our users, this is a very historic hotel, and it's got a beautiful history to it. And we are currently just looking at some last remnants of snow in Raleigh. So I would highly recommend, if you haven't visited Raleigh and you haven't visited Heights Hotel, to definitely come here. It's an experience you won't forget. Thank you so much, Kate. Thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Sharbani.
All right.
Nice. Gosh, how long did we go for? That was a long one.
I will check. Okay, let's see. From data management and product innovation to regulatory compliance, whether it's optimizing costs or enhancing efficiencies, Infinity is your partner for solving tricky problems with a human-centric and tech-powered approach. Connect with us at contact@.infinity.co.